Pharaoh, carries considerable significance because it ties directly into well-known biblical accounts. While the Bible does not record personal names for most pharaohs, it does emphasize their roles in key events, particularly involving the ancient Israelites. Here's an overview of how Jehovah's Witnesses often discuss and interpret what the Bible and historical sources say about Pharaoh. 1. Meaning and usage of the title, Pharaoh. Pharaoh was not a personal name but rather a royal title of the kings of ancient Egypt. This title evolved through Egypt's long history, though the biblical account typically groups them under one generic term. Jehovah's Witnesses recognize that these rulers considered themselves semi-divine or divine representatives of the gods, and they commanded great power and reverence among the Egyptian people. 2. Pharaohs in the Book of Genesis. The earliest references to Pharaoh in the Bible appear in the Book of Genesis. One significant narrative involves Abram at the time, and Sarai, who journeyed to Egypt due to a famine in Canaan. The Pharaoh of that era took notice of Sarah's beauty and took her into his household, believing her to be Abram's sister. When plagues struck the Pharaoh's house, he realized Sarah was Abram's wife and returned her, even offering gifts. Jehovah's Witnesses underscore that this event highlights God's protective hand over Abraham's family and foreshadows future divine interventions involving pharaohs. Later in Genesis, Joseph's story features another pharaoh. This pharaoh had puzzling dreams about 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows, which Joseph interpreted to mean 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. Impressed by the interpretation, the pharaoh elevated Joseph to second in command in Egypt. According to Jehovah's Witnesses, this account underscores Jehovah's power to direct events, using Joseph to preserve Jacob's family, the Israelites, and paving the way for future developments in the biblical narrative. 3. The Pharaoh of the Exodus. Perhaps the most notable pharaoh in the Bible is the one who reigned when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. Jehovah's Witnesses believe this account in Exodus dramatically illustrates God's authority over even the mightiest kings. Initially, Pharaoh refused Moses' request to let the Israelites go. The Bible's account shows how Jehovah inflicted 10 plagues on Egypt, each targeting an aspect of Egyptian society or even the Egyptian gods. Pharaoh's repeated refusal, his wavering after certain plagues, and his eventual pursuit of the Israelites to the Red Sea are all integral parts of the Exodus narrative. From Jehovah's Witnesses' perspective, this Pharaoh's downfall exemplifies that no ruler can successfully oppose God's will. 4. Pharaoh's hardened heart. Jehovah's Witnesses delve into the question of why Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Did God force Pharaoh to reject Moses' demands, or did Pharaoh harden his own heart? Their explanations often emphasize that Pharaoh chose to defy Moses and Aaron voluntarily. Although the Bible sometimes phrases it as, Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart, Jehovah's Witnesses interpret this to mean that God allowed circumstances to develop that would inevitably confront Pharaoh with a choice. The repeated miracles and plagues left Pharaoh without excuse. In the face of such overwhelming evidence of God's power, Pharaoh stubbornly resisted, thereby hardening his heart. This underscores a central moral lesson that defiance against God's purpose leads to ruin. 5. Historical and archaeological context. While the Bible does not name specific pharaohs, Jehovah's Witnesses acknowledge that secular history has tried to identify them, sometimes pointing to Thutmose III, Ramesses II, or Amenhotep II, depending on the timeline proposed by different scholars. Yet Jehovah's Witnesses focus less on pinpointing the exact pharaoh and more on the spiritual and moral lessons taught through the biblical record. They frequently remind readers that the Bible is not primarily a history textbook but rather a divine message highlighting Jehovah's dealings with humankind. 6. The Pharaoh's religious claims. JW.org materials also highlight how pharaohs associated themselves closely with the Egyptian pantheon, often claiming divine or semi-divine status. The narrative of the 10 plagues, Exodus chapters 7 to 12, can be read as a direct challenge to these claims, with each plague corresponding to or discrediting a key Egyptian deity. Jehovah's Witnesses see this as part of the broader biblical theme of Jehovah's sovereignty over false religion and political powers. 7. Pharaoh as a symbol of worldly power. In some scriptural discussions and teachings, Jehovah's Witnesses use Pharaoh as an archetype of political regimes or rulers who oppose God's people and God's purpose. They often draw parallels between Pharaoh's stubbornness and modern-day attitudes or structures that resist divine direction. This notion highlights the principle found at James chapter 4 verse 6, that God opposes the haughty ones. In that sense, the ancient Pharaoh becomes a lesson that arrogance and defiance against the true God inevitably leads to downfall. 8. Takeaway for modern Christians. Finally, Jehovah's Witnesses apply the account of Pharaoh to modern Christian life. They encourage individuals not to harden their hearts, referencing Hebrews chapter 3 verse 15, when it comes to recognizing God's standards or adjusting their course of action. The experiences of Pharaoh reinforce the lesson that humility and cooperation with God will bring blessings, whereas defiance brings negative consequences. Please share and like and please subscribe.